Hi everyone and welcome to this live broadcast from Shatila refugee camp in southern Beirut, Lebanon. We are here to discuss the situation for the refugees, the newly arrived Palestinian refugees, but also the refugees that have been here for generations. I am Ylva Bergman and I'm here for OmVärlden, and we're very happy to be here in Shatila refugee camps with some very important guests that work with these refugee issues in the camp. And I'm very happy to have you here. Samar Abboud, you are the Deputy Country Director for Save the Children, and you work with refugee children from all kinds of situations, but also Palestinians and you Syrian Palestinians.
Yes.
And we are very happy to have you, Rodolph Gebrael, who is the Country Manager for Diakonia, which is also a Swedish organization that works with many partner organizations around the world for democracy, human rights and development. And I think one of your partner organizations is the one that you are representing, Leila. It's called Association Najdeh, and it's an organization focusing on Palestinian refugees.
Yeah, to
with
the camps and the gatherings in Lebanon.
Yes, and gender issues and development and education. So we are very happy that you are here. We are now sitting in Shatila, which is a refugee camp that was created when Israel was founded in 1948, and many Palestinian refugees came here. And we are also in Lebanon, which is one of the countries that has been very much affected by the refugee crisis. I think that it's one of the countries in the area that has taken in most refugees, actually, per capita. And I think they say something like 1.5 million or more. So at this point. So, and the world is facing the biggest humanitarian crisis ever seen when it comes to refugees right now. Every minute 6 people are running away from a crisis of some sort or a catastrophe. So it's a very pressing issue. The EU has kind of locked all the doors for the refugees, and maybe we are happy we don't see them anymore, but you are seeing them and you are here with them and living with them and working with them. And we're going to start talking about the youth in Shatila. Some have been here for generations, since '49, and some are newly arrived from Syria. What is the situation, Leila, for the youth in Shatila?
In Shatila and in all Palestinian refugee camps and gatherings, youth, they are lack any job opportunities, they lack any places where they can gather, practice their hobbies. They lack also the free access to do what they would like to do. They have facing difficulties in terms of the squeezed place area, bad infrastructure, and even overcrowded educational institutions, including the UNRWA.
So you are describing a very destitute area, a very hopeless future. Rodolph, what do you do to create hope for a young generation born into a state of refugee or statelessness?
Yeah, definitely. Our programs in Lebanon focus a lot on Palestinian refugee, even before the Syrian crisis, with our partner Najdeh, but also with other partners like partner called CBR, working with people with disability in the camps, and other partners who work on issues like the right to work, for example, for Palestinian. A lot of work on advocacy to access health, to access work, to access to enjoy rights when it comes especially to Palestinian, but also to other children who are facing a lot of problems. Street children with Dar al Amal, another also partners who's sitting also nearby.
So they also live, other refugees come and live in Shatila, not only Palestinians.
Definitely.
So Samar, it's a terrible situation that we're just getting a little glimpse of here for the children. And education is a very important issue for Save the Children, and we're hearing that it's not working very well, apparently. How would you describe the situation when it comes to education for the Palestinian refugees?
So, of course, education services are provided mainly by UNRWA, the organization catering for Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. Of course, there's issues of access with UNRWA's decreased funding. There's issues of access and overcrowding, as Leila, my colleague here, just said. But also quality of education in the schools, violence and discrimination, which was compounded by the arrival of as well the Palestinian refugees from Syria, who have also settled in a camp, and who also now carry the double burden of being not only refugees from Palestine, but also now refugees from Syria settled in the camps. They also face additional issues related to education, related to their ability to catch up with a different curriculum here in Lebanon.
Because it's different in the different countries, like in Sweden and Norway and so on.
Of course. And so being able to catch up quite quickly in classes and with their teachers. So the teachers also being able to integrate the children within their overcrowded classrooms. So Save the Children works a lot with children in the camps, whether in early childhood care and development, or also with UNRWA teachers in terms of better catching up to the curriculums, but also being able to manage classrooms and being able to have positive discipline in the classrooms. But not only children face issues related to the education, very often they drop out as well due to the need to provide income for families. So sometimes as well, children do drop out and they're engaged in child labor, which is something also Save the Children tries to work on. But there are many, many things that children, whether they're Palestinian children born here in Lebanon or Palestinian children coming from Syria, that they face every day many difficulties.
So children dropping out of schools and having lack of infrastructure, Leila, and things like this, how do you motivate the women and the children to keep going into school? Anyone would like to comment that? Do you want to?
It's not easy to live in a place like Shatila with less than 1 square kilometer overcrowded area. Before the crisis, the population was around 17,000. Now, with the displaced people coming from Syria, it's not less than 22,000. So
It's very difficult.
It's very difficult. So it's not difficult. It's not easy to even motivate people. So you have to indirectly approaching them and providing them with some hopes.
So what do you tell them? What do you say?
What we say is, I have to say, on basis, each human being has the potential to do something positive, or have positive things to continue and to go further in their daily life and to build for their future, whether these are youth or the children or women, even in such a place. So at the personal level, I'm not talking about the community level. At the community level,
But on an
it's
individual
much
level,
more difficult to do a kind of improvement. But at the individual level, each person can do a lot.
And this is what you are working with to try to empower the parents to send the kids to school and so on.
And not only talking to women, children, and people living, refugees living in those bad conditions. Also with our partners, Najdeh, we talk a lot with, or we advocate for the rights with the Lebanese authority, with other Lebanese organization, NGO, civil society, people, about very, very severe problem, because the main problem of refugees are the access. And one of them is access to education is one, as Samar said, but also access to health services. And we can see, like, throughout the intervention, a lot of women who are alone, living alone, where men like stayed in Syria or are somewhere else. So a lot of families who are where women are the caregiver or women are leading those families. And with all those problems of adding this, all the gender dynamics, that Najdeh work a lot on this. And the access is very important. And talking to other, like Lebanese authority and NGO.
So the international community, when it comes to development, are talking about a paradigm shift, that you would not just work with humanitarian issues on one side and then development on the other side, that you would like marry that together and create opportunities for the individual, Do you think this is working? Do you think it's a good strategy?
Well, it's a good strategy, but it's working. I think it's a big debate. At least the international community is trying, especially now, for example, we can see that there is some strategy for Syria, like see that strategy for the Syrian crisis, trying to merge a bit from it's not pure humanitarian or not pure development, but having this, which is a great idea, because a humanitarian crisis is not happening like it's not happening in silos or like alone. It's happening in a context that is developing.
So could the Palestinian refugees be like an example of this? Would you say that they have the schools, the health system, maybe some of them, we said earlier on, a little bit better educated, maybe there's some newly arriving Palestinians. Is it a good example of this, or is it a bad example?
A lot should be done at this level, on this approach. Recently, a lot of studies and researches have been conducted on the type of the intervention should be done with the long-term crisis.
Yes.
The best approach should integrate different types of interventions. One of them is the direct services and support. The second one is the livelihood. The third is related to the capacity building.
Could you give us some example of the livelihood, how that could be changed? I mean, what are we talking about, cash handouts, or what?
No, cash is something related to the services
humanitarian.
and the humanitarian. No, when I'm talking about the livelihood, it's the type of work that people they do and they are generating income from it, or such as vocational training, professional skills, and then they join directly to the job market or obtaining the jobs.
Job matching.
So I think we cannot also talk about development without talking about sustainable services. So as long as these communities are still relying on the aid community or the international community to survive, then we cannot say this is working, which is the case of Palestinian refugees. I think we need to talk about their right to access services, their right to be able to have their own income generation, their right to be able to access quality education, their right. So as long as these rights are still not fulfilled, then it is very difficult to talk about development or to say development is working.
What do you think should be done to put these rights in place? What could be a possible solution?
A possible solution will be for all stakeholders, whether it's international communities or UN agencies or the Lebanese government and the Palestinian community, working together to fulfill those rights. It's not one party or the other, excluding one party or the other. It's all of them working together to have these rights. And we speak a lot about the rights of children. Lebanon is signatory to the Convention of the Right of the Child, and so which means that every child living in Lebanon needs to have these equal rights and equal access to these services. So
but what needs then? Is it a lot of money? Is it plans, or is it?
It is commitments, it is plans, it is policy change, it is all of it together. And of course it needs support from the international community and from the local community here, whether it's Lebanese or Palestinian, to work together to achieve those plans.
Do you think you're getting the support needed?
I think it's sometimes it depends on the context. So for example, now with the Syria crisis, a lot of these plans have shifted in terms of priorities. But I think donors now, or in the international community, is pushing a little bit more, and also the communities are asking for more focus now on sustainable services. So hopefully we will see more of that. But yeah.
And a lot of work need also to be done on the hosting community or the communities who are already living in this area and their acceptance to refugees. Plans are like working on rights, it's crucial, definitely. Working on resources is very important, but we all know that we have limited resources. But also we know that social acceptance, things like social acceptance of the hosting community will facilitate a lot. For example, the work, the jobs like matching, because the main problem with the right to work, working with Palestinian in the job matching also was the acceptance, rather than if we work on the legal issue, but how the community will be accepting, how the work environment will be accepting a refugee. And this is sometimes a phase in the, or a situation that really we don't put a lot of effort to analyze and to understand.
Can you give me an example so that maybe the listeners understand what you're talking about? Palestinians don't have the right to work in certain professions.
Yeah.
They have a lot of restrictions.
Definitely.
Can you help us understand a little bit what by some
sure.
examples?
I will give a positive example where Najdeh had a big stake working on the right to work, for example, for nurses in the Lebanese hospitals. And then we can see that even though we enforced a lot, we worked a lot with Najdeh on the right to work for nurses, and we through the professional network we managed to get some exception where Palestinian nurses are working. We still see that in some hospitals, like nurses, Palestinian nurses were more welcome than other hospitals. And this is what I'm saying, that even like we pushed a lot on the right level and we work a lot on the professional level to get access, but then we figured out that a lot of work needs to be done also in the hosting community, with the hosting community, with the perception also of people.
I think the problem here is that the Palestinian camps and gatherings, they are totally isolated from its neighboring areas. There is a stereotyping of the
it's a
Palestinians
ghetto, like
in
living
the
in.
country.
What is that? What is the stereotype?
It's linked to the war, destroying the country,
Social status, security related.
related things,
So-
something like this. So this is what really Rodolph is talking about. It's totally separated communities. Even if for Shatila, for instance, it's nearby the Lebanese area. It's totally integrated within the Lebanese area, but rarely to find the Lebanese person, except those who are poor and live in the camp, rarely to find somebody to come and enter the camp. Who have, as I said, stereotyping
But
figure, picture.
what are the, you mentioned nurses, so the Palestinians are not allowed to work in certain professions.
Definitely, yeah.
Why? And what are these professions?
Well, some professions like this is like kind of preserved for Lebanese nationals, like for example lawyers, people working like architect or engineers. So they are most of the profession who are like in orders, we call them like orders of, or even orders of
Like high-level
engineers.
professions,
High
or?
level. It's not only high level professions, but
Organized
organized.
So Samar,
Yes,
tell me, yeah.
this is even more compounded for refugees coming from Syria, where they're only allowed to work in 3 sectors actually, which is agriculture, construction, and the environment, which is mainly waste management. So not only are they restricted for these 20 professions, they're actually restricted from all professions except these 3 sectors, which makes it very difficult for them to be able to be resilient, as we say, or survive and not depend on humanitarian aid.
And to become this individual that you're working at,
Exactly,
trying to
and hence
access
they
education.
would resort to negative coping mechanisms, for example, including dropping their children from schools, asking their children to go to work, having early marriage, as they would think that their daughters would be safer if they're married off early. So all of these things, what we call negative coping mechanisms, in order for them to cope with the situation.
How common is this, that they drop out of school, would you say?
Actually, very common.
high
Yes,
rate.
it's a very high rate. Yeah.
At what age do they drop out?
Usually they drop out, it depends on all ages, and it depends, but mainly it's after 12. We can see a very high dropout rate with children.
Both
Yeah.
boys and girls?
Both boys and girls.
And what are they
Sometimes even
facing?
boys more than girls. In some cases, boys more than girls, because they can access work opportunities more than girls. Yeah.
And,
So-
and the main problem also here could be how the school in Lebanon is like structured, because we have this compulsory education like till age of 12. Then it's like in the classroom should, like everyone should succeed, should go to the next level somehow. But then they arrive at 12 and they could not cope with the system. So there is
The
also a
Lebanese
lot
system.
of the Lebanese
So the
system.
Palestinians go through the Lebanese system, even in the
And
Shatila?
Lebanon, yeah, was through
Yes.
UNRWA schools.
And
yeah.
also, this, you said this was a problem with the Syrians coming because they come from a different system of
Yes.
schooling.
Yes. And so because of this automatic passing until a specific grade, then they may even reach a grade where they cannot catch up, they don't have functional literacy, for example. They can recognize the letters, but they may be not necessarily be able to read the full sentence and understand what it means. And so there's a lot of issues related to that, and also ability to catch up on the foreign language, where in Lebanon you would teach in English and French specific topics, and then they would find it difficult to be able to catch up on
Is
those.
there any talk about for like an international standard for all these refugees the world are talking about now? The world is seeing the most refugees in the world,
Yeah.
and there's going to be a lot of refugees, generations growing up in, you know, ad hoc schools here and there.
Yeah.
What could be, is there any talk about like an international grading system? Or?
Well, we do encourage all children to access formal systems, because if they access formal systems, then they could have the certifications, which would allow them later to be able to level it off in case they resettled, in case they return, in case they want to access different type of educational systems such as vocational trainings, and they would be able to get their official certification, which would allow them to pass to the next level. So we do encourage that as well, but otherwise to speak of an international standard is very difficult. I mean, usually if they want to be integrated in the country, they have to be within the country's...
But it creates problems, and then they grow up, and your childhood is very short.
Definitely.
You don't have very many years to actually finish your school.
And as Samar was saying, we need to be careful not encouraging parallel system or informal education, because then refugees will find themselves in a situation where they have been to schools, but then it's not accredited. They don't have like formal education is also a solution, not to really find a full like generation who will be very soon out of school or education.
Leila, when you think about all these young children here growing up like this as refugees, as you yourself did, I believe.
Yeah, but during my age, the situation was better. I have to say that. That's because the PLO was there at that time. There was a lot of support, especially for the educational system and for access to higher educational level for Palestinians in general. It's not the case anymore. Here it's much more
So it's
difficult.
more desperate now, would you say?
There is lack of privacy even. I don't know how children, they can read and study even in their houses. Lack of electricity, lack of water. So it's not easy. During my time it was much more easier.
So what do you feel about the future when you think about these things for these refugee kids growing up now?
As Rodolph was saying, we are providing direct services, but we also having a big component of advocacy related to the Palestinians' rights in Lebanon, mainly the right to work and children's rights and refugee women rights. So we have a big component also integrating, I mean, the services with the advocacy components.
And we were talking about the school situation, and I was saying to Samar from Save the Children that in Sweden we have like money that goes with your child that you could then choose. The idea is that you should be able to choose school or healthcare institution, and it should be equal for all. So is this something that could be a possibility for the refugee kids? Or?
Well, definitely. Of course, multi-purpose cash, as we call it, assistance is provided to Syrian refugees, and also Palestinians have access to a social safety net from UNRWA. However, that is not accessible to all. Only the most severely vulnerable, and not even the most severely vulnerable, are fully covered with this cash assistance. It's a very small fraction of refugees, and even that money is not enough for them to cover all their needs. Now, for school system, in terms of Syrian children accessing the Lebanese formal system or Palestinian children accessing UNRWA system, their tuitions are usually subsidized from that sense. But that's not the main barrier for them to accessing education or being retained in education. As I mentioned earlier, the main barriers or the main reasons for their dropout are related to the curriculum, are related to discrimination, to violence in schools, and
so the main reason is not the money, but although they
social
still
factors
do not have them, if they're a very good student, you cannot go to a good Lebanese school.
Or if their family has no access to these safety nets, then they would need to go and work to support their families, and that's where we also talk about child labor, as I said earlier.
So Rodolph, how do you feel about this new generation of refugees growing up, have a short period of time to succeed, sort of, to go through the school system or to become strong individuals, resilient is the word. How do you feel about that? How is the world doing so far?
Well, I'm sure that we can do more and we can do better for like things on, as Samar was saying, the main problem is not only technical, like educational and technical, but social integration and social support, like support from this and social capital are factors that are really things that we need to rethink about it when we are designing our interventions. The main issue is access. Definitely is a big thing, so we need to work on the access because the most vulnerable people, the people really in need, have a main problem to access the schools, to access the health systems.
When you say problem to access, is it like going with a bus, or what do you mean by that for people who don't know?
All of could be problem really of physical access, like going to those spaces.
They don't have money for the bus. There is no bus.
Not only money, but like people living in camps are living like in ghettos. They are living in closed areas. So even there is social barriers. Not only having vehicles or having a bus to go, but also they have legal barriers. Like they don't have their paper, they don't have papers, so they are afraid to go and if they are like stopped in the checkpoints. So all these problem of access, not only physical, are something that we need to reconsider and need to think. And well, if we really want to have more refugees have more chances to succeed in the future, working on access, I think, is crucial.
And what could be a good way of doing that? I mean, what works in your experience?
For Palestinians, my experience is that without providing Palestinians their right to work, then less students will access the schools and the whole educational system. Because usually people, they are attending, enrolling in these the different educational institutions to join jobs, to earn income, and to live in a dignified way, which is not the case for Palestinians. They educated here, they graduated from the universities, but they stuck and they cannot join any job.
The workforce.
So what happens to these people then, that they maybe graduated, or okay, some drop it out, as we heard, some don't have to work in labor, but let's say someone who went to university education, what happens to a person like that?
A lot of them, they don't work in their field of specialization. So many of the engineers who graduated as mechanical engineers, for instance, they are working on repairing cars. So many, they are working on taxi drivers, or selling groceries. So
what about the Syrian Palestinians that are arriving? Is there a division between the Syrian Palestinians arriving, the newcomers, and the ones that have born here, but maybe also generations in this Shatila, for instance?
In terms of legal status, yeah, there is difference. We had a big project for around 2 years with Diakonia on a protection. This was totally focused on the legal status of the refugees.
So what is the difference? It's like
in terms of the residency, there is a big difference. The Palestinian Syrians, they are not allowed to enter the country or to move from the country easily. It's not the same. Palestinian who born in Lebanon, they have the travel document issued by the Lebanese government, and we can move. We can cross the borders once we have the visa. It's not the case with the Palestinian Syrians. In order to enter the country, they have to meet some specific criteria. This is one. In terms of their legal residency in the country, also they have visa which is ended each 6 months, and then they have to wait until there is an official announcement how to renew their visa.
Yeah. So a lot of them are like without a residency permit, so they are blocked. They could not move, they could not...
And not having the residency permit as well will not allow them to access services. So if they're not access services, then there's a lot of protection concerns, because as I said earlier, they would resort to negative coping mechanisms where they would drop their children out of schools. If they're adults, they're afraid of being stopped at checkpoints, so they would send the children to work. So there's a lot of protection concerns that come with it then when they don't have the legal papers.
Is this just for the Palestinian refugees then? Or is
It's
this
also for Syrian refugees, not only for Palestinians from Syria.
Works for the Palestinians, or is it the same problems? Or?
Well, I think it's the same in terms of residency. I think it's the same.
Now it's a bit the same in terms of residency, means like there is now more than 70% who are not be able to renew their residency
For all refugees.
for all of them. But if we want to focus on Palestinian coming from Syria, like here the ratio is 90%. I think it's a bit worse when it comes, for example, to the also time. So Syrian refugees who are already in very bad conditions, we're not saying that they are better, but then they can, for example, renew their residency for a year, although a Palestinian coming from Syria will renew it only for 6 months. So there is some also kind of discrimination in this discriminatory already.
And why?
existing
Why is
system.
this discrimination happening?
Well, I think the status of Palestinian, we really don't know why this discrimination is happening. We try to talk a lot with the gender security, with people to advocate, but there is a discrimination due to sometimes people will talk about security, will talk about other things, integration. So
What do you think? What is the reason?
Well, I cannot, for the discrimination, again, it's the status of Palestinians in Lebanon in general with a long history here. And so it is definitely related to that. So, but yeah, I cannot give that.
So,
if we really know why, so we can maybe
Tackle
address it and tackle it anymore. If we're trying
Yeah,
to
we are trying,
trying
and
to
I think
understand.
one of the main problems that the treatment of Palestinians is taking place by the Lebanese government is that they are tackling the issue from the security perspective, not from the human rights perspective. So everything related to the Palestinians, whether these are born here in the country or who came from Syria, directly linked to the security issues and not taking into consideration what it means, the poverty and the restrictions, which is might also reflect it negatively on the country and on the community itself. When you are poor people, when you are live in poverty, any person can attract you to do whatever, just to feed the mouths of
just
your
what
house.
you were also talking about the
Yep.
negative coping
Yep,
mechanisms.
yep.
But now I believe that the idea is that the Syrians should return to Syria, and maybe also the Syrian
This is in
Palestinians.
case the situation or the road is paved for their returning
So-
back.
Yeah, to make sure that
so-
it's a voluntary return, it's not against any human rights, you know.
Do we know that that has happened? Or?
I don't think, we don't believe that the conditions for return are there yet. So for the conditions to be there yet, these conditions would be safety, dignity, and when we say dignity, their ability to access services, their ability to restore their livelihoods, and also voluntariness of return. So if these three conditions are not met, then we would not support having a premature, let's say, return.
But has it not already happened?
A
No.
mass one? No, not yet. We had one organized incident, the incident of Arsal, which was more of a political deal that happened between the two governments. But in general, it's been ad hoc returns, small ones we've seen, but not really mass returns.
So, if we look at the international community again, since we're here in Shatila, and there's been a lot of projects through UNRWA and through your different organizations, what effect does it have, do you think, the international development on the people here living, growing up? Is it just keeping your head over the water, or is it helping, or is it progress, or what's?
I think we cannot ignore the help of the international community to the refugees, whether the Palestinian refugees since '48 or to the newly refugee and displaced people coming from Syria. But this is not enough. If the support, talking about the financial support now, if this is not linked to the political support, where people they can have access to their rights, including the national rights, the improvement will be limited. As
What do
I
you
said.
say, Rodolph?
I will say that maybe a lot of differences that we can do this change. We have a lot of stories on change makers, like people like Leila, for example, or other people who lived in the camp, who do a lot on individual cases. Like I could not also figure out the camp without like Najdeh or other association working here, having their free schools, nurseries, providing some education. So I will say that it's very crucial and it's very important on the maybe personal level or like individual level. But there is also a lot to do in the structural level. If we really want to work on the structure of addressing poverty, we need to work more on the structural level, on advocacy, on accesses. But I'm sure that lot of personal stories, without the international help, a lot of women, mainly women and children, maybe they've been suffering more and maybe they will have less resources to survive the crisis.
What do you think?
So, for example, through the work of Save the Children, which is supported by the international community, with the humanitarian aid we provide a minimum dignity and protection for refugees, especially with children, access to basic services such as education and child protection and so on and so forth. However, we also, as Rodolph was saying, work on advocacy, so with children's rights, participation in government, so that children themselves are able to recognize or be aware of what their rights are and be able to know who the duty bearers are and ask those duty bearers to have their rights.
Just last week, that's happening amongst refugees?
Well, just last week we had an event with the Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs where children were there demanding their rights and also demanding that they have access to their rights and that they're also equally treated and protected. And also, as we said, for structural changes to happen, we need political solutions. With no political solutions, it is basically keeping our heads above water.
So what do you think? If you look at the world, you have the biggest refugee crisis ever documented, I think, right now happening all over. We have places like Shatila. You can just see the houses out here, how people have lived for generations. And this is happening in other places in the world, in Kenya, but the Palestinians here are, without any, they're stateless, basically. What do you think will happen? I mean, how do you feel? Do you feel hopeful for the response from the international community when it comes to children?
Well, what we ask the international community is to have durable solutions for refugees, and durable solutions are usually three. You either ask for equal rights where they are, so local integration, and their equal access to, as we said, the right to work, the right to education, the right to protection, and all of that. Or in case they need to return, then we would ask that return to be safe and dignified and voluntary. Or if possible, usually the third option is usually resettlement, which is something that we see clearly now is becoming less and less of an option, unfortunately, for refugees.
So just to be a devil's advocate here, would you say that the international community has kept all these refugees in these locked situations, pumping in money? Would it be better not to just give any money and let the situation solve itself?
I don't think that would be very fruitful. That might be counterproductive, actually, but especially if there's no willingness from existing governments to integrate these populations. And also, well, let's not forget that also these hosting governments we're talking about have also their own pre-existing problems that predate the crisis. So with the additional burden of the refugees, it has overstretched the infrastructure. So the aid should also come, not necessarily, as we said, it's to the host communities, it's to support these structures to also these government structures and infrastructures to be able to handle that, and also the direct aid to the refugees themselves.
So we're going to summarize, and it's been a super interesting discussion to hear your experience from Shatila, but one question stays is, what should the international community do to change the sense of being, to change the statelessness for the Palestinians? What needs to be done?
I think it's good to work on the humanitarian part, but also we also international community should push work for political solution.
Which is
for all refugees. Like if we're talking here, the right to return for Palestinian refugee, the right to return not only to return to Syria but also to return to Palestine. So it's a like political solution are the key for other solutions.
The international community committed on the right to return of Palestinians based on the UN Resolution 194.
Do you think it's going to happen?
Should be happen, because otherwise the international community should keep paying for this ongoing miserable situation of the Palestinian refugees everywhere, not only in Lebanon, but they are paying for all Palestinian refugees, including in West Bank, in Gaza, in Syria, in Jordan, until now. This is the truth. So in order to push for ending this statelessness of the Palestinians, the right to return to Palestine, to our homeland, should be implemented.
What do you say? It's a very political issue.
Of course, yes, it is a political issue, and their right to return, and as I said, their right to have a proper legal status that would allow them equal rights with everyone. So I think that is the only solution that we can see.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining OmVärlden and Al Kompis in this live sent and also produced debate. We have been sending live here from Shatila. We've been talking about refugees being born into a state of refugee, stateless Palestinians that came here in 49, and also the new Syrian Palestinians that come here, and other Syrian refugees, as an example of what can happen when a refugee crisis is not solved. But we have also talked about the different strategies that the people do here, and that the organizations working in Shatila. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you on Thursday for our next debate. Bye.